Hey everyone, we're going to continue now with the volume inputs menu in Synchro. And between recording this video and the last video, I realized I forgot to turn off the right turn channel I created here to show you guys. So I'm just going to turn that off before we begin. The volume menu has a number of inputs that we can make, of course related to the traffic volume. You'll start seeing more and more as we go through this that some of the values in these input menus are in vertical or non-italicized text. Some of them are in italicized text. The italicized text basically indicates that this is a value that VISTRO will normally calculate automatically. So they're not ones that we typically need to touch. And in some cases, I don't think VISTRO will, for some of them, you're not even able to edit them. We won't have to do too much of that, but I just wanted to bring that to your attention. And before we get into the volumes, I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the quirks, I guess, or more niche things that we need to consider when we're working in an actual industry sort of application with a software like VISTRO. So very commonly, when we're working with something like VISTRO, it's usually in the context of some sort of traffic study. And usually with a traffic study, whether you're doing it for a public client or a private client, at some point it will have to be approved by the local municipality or municipalities, and in some cases as well, the Ministry of Transportation. And each of those reviewers may have different requirements for how the study is conducted. So in some of your classes, you may have worked with actual field data and inputted the exact values, but more often in industry, we're not able to do that level of data collection, and so instead, the reviewing agencies will specify some of those values. And Region of Waterloo is no exception to that. So they publish these guidelines for traffic impact studies and for capacity analysis and signal warrant work that they review. So the Region of Waterloo prefers Synchro software, but we're going to kind of adapt these requirements to VISTRO just to sort of demonstrate how we would go about this normally. So again, this is all grouped together more how Synchro organizes it, but it's very similar. So one of the things we're going to edit is the saturated flow. Instead of using field data or using the default values in VISTRO, we're going to change the base saturation flow depending on the configuration of the lane. And the Region of Waterloo has different ones for different types of lanes. And there's basically every type of lane that you would commonly see in the region. Again, lots of other values, ones that we'll adjust later. Area type CBD, so this is if it's in the central business district, whether it's uptown or downtown. And this has an effect on the saturation flow. You can see they also specify how you should measure the storage length. So they ask for the length of the storage bay without the taper, which is what we did earlier. So this is another reason to measure it that way, just to comply with the agency. There's also volume settings. So volume is pretty straightforward. It will be peak hour turning movement counts. We can also enter in things like the peak hour factor, which you might have talked about in class. Although we can go out, of course, and when we collect turning movement counts, usually we'll get a field value for peak hour factor. A lot of agencies prefer to specify a specific peak hour factor for use in their studies. And for the Region of Waterloo, they prefer a peak hour factor of 1.0. So essentially, that's a flat hourly peak. Heavy vehicles, we can input that as well. Unfortunately, the data set that I have doesn't have field data for heavy vehicles, so we are just going to leave that as default, but it's worth noting that you wouldn't normally do that. And then there's a couple other things here related to signal timings as well. So just know that this document exists, and we're going to try and follow some of it as we go through this tutorial. Okay, so without further ado, we're going to start inputting the volumes. You'll notice that in each of these menus, the first couple rows here are always the same. So we don't need to change anything about the lane configuration or the names of the streets or anything like that. We're going to start here with the base volume. And unfortunately, I don't have the original turning movement diagram. So I'm going to take my turning movement counts from a previous study that I did in VISTRO here. So you can see it's aligned the same way. So I'm just going to keep this on one side of my screen here and enter them in. So northbound left 172, northbound through 143, right 86, southbound left 221, southbound through 278, 111 for right, then Columbia Street eastbound 121 left, 613 through 101 right, westbound left 188 through 497 and right 172. Like I said before, we're going to leave the heavy vehicles percentage at 2%, just because I don't have any field data to the contrary. But normally you would want to enter in the actual field values. And that is it for this sort of section. We can enter in a growth factor. This is more if we were doing a traffic impact analysis and trying to forecast future volumes, but for what we're doing here, we don't need to worry about that. There's also this section, TIA demand. This is for if we were adding trips related to development that might impact traffic in the network. We could add those here, but we don't need to worry about that today, so I'm just going to minimize that. And again, future total volume, this will be calculated by the software, but in our case, it'll just be the same as our base volume because we haven't made any changes to the growth or added any site traffic. Right turn on red, by default, I believe that will be on for you. If not, in Ontario, almost all intersections allow a right turn on red, so we'll check those off. And VISTRO allows you to define how many cars will make a right turn on red. And if you've looked at some of the methodology in the highway capacity manual, you'll note that that's important for assessing the performance of the intersection. There are a couple different ways you can do it. You can either enter in a certain number, so you could say, oh, every cycle 2 vehicles will make a right turn on red. Or you can define it as a percentage of the total vehicles. So if you define a percentage of vehicles turning on red, say I define 10%, then 10% of our 86 vehicles, or 9 vehicles, will be considered to be turning right on the red. Again, in the absence of other information, we're just going to leave it at 0 to be more conservative. Total hourly volume. Oh yeah, so you can see that if we did enter in a number, it would be subtracted from our total volume that's being considered in the analysis. So although 86 vehicles are making a right turn, if 2 vehicles are turning right on red, then we're really only assessing 84 in our capacity analysis. but we're going to leave that at 0. Next row here is the peak hour factor. We can of course adjust this depending on how peaky our peak hour is, how much of a surge of traffic we see in every 15-minute interval. But per the Region of Waterloo guidelines, we're going to leave it at the default, which is 1.0. And then here we can also do other adjustment factors, but we don't have to do that today. We can also select here if there is on-street parking. In this case, there isn't. If you're familiar with the Columbia and Phillip intersection, here I'll just go on Street View. There is no room for street parking. In fact, you can even see there's a no parking sign right there. So we're not going to worry about that, but just know that that option is there. And that is all we need to input for the volume menu. It's quite short if you're not doing a traffic impact assessment. So I'll see you guys in the next video.